Okay. Well, I know that Bob can handle this. That's for sure.
Well,
Has
let's see how tough your questions are for me.
Yeah.
This is The Cross Section with Nate Lull and David Edelstein.
Featuring special guest, Unadilla Valley Superintendent Bob Mackey.
Let's see what happens in the next week or so. I'm hoping that that we're going to hear something about sports other than sports like football and volleyball, and get some different concepts out there. I don't know. I haven't heard back. This is the first time I've emailed Robert Zayas a few times about our alternate concepts down here, and he's responded every time but this one. So I know they're a little busy up there.
Wait. What are some? Nate and I have like been the kings of alternate concepts. I'm very curious what some of. Maybe you know. I don't know them yet. So what are some of these alternate concepts?
So before the sports were formally okay to do, and we say they're okay to do, but all of the wheels could fall off. Obviously, if you're familiar with the Oneonta area, obviously all the wheels can fall off in less than a week, similar to UNC. But between now and the 21st, anything can happen. So what we had started to do in the MAC League is try to come up with a process or a list of alternative intramural sports we could do in our own school systems, not head to head, obviously, because that would be trying to circumvent NYSVA and New York State DOH and the governor. And while I don't mind, stretching the rules, I don't really like violating the law. So I'm a little cautious on that. So intramurals was the way to go. And we started our planning probably I was pushing back in May, and Nate probably is aware of this, but we were frustrated because I couldn't get any leverage. They all just thought, hey, sports are going to happen. It's going to be fine. And superintendents didn't want to believe that. I guess it wasn't going to happen. So I pushed, and finally we got headway about mid-August, and the athletic directors and coordinators in our league started to put together a Google Doc to share. We wanted to try to come up with 3 to 5 sports that we could kick off by September 23rd in our local schools through an intramural concept, in case they canceled fall sports. Even if they push fall sports and try to do that truncated January to June thing, there's going to be so many issues of kids having to choose sports that are in the same seasons, sports that overlap. It doesn't feel like it's something that's gonna make kids rest at ease. You know what I mean? I think that they're a little frustrated with not having. I think more frustrated with not having clubs and sports than they are anything else.
It seems like that's one of the biggest critiques of the January plan, if there aren't fall sports. Because even though the governor said that there will be and they're working toward it, I'm in the mode of, like everyone else I've spoken with so far, that I'm not predicting anything. So until it happens, it hasn't happened. So January could still be a factor like that. But that's one of the biggest critiques I've been hearing about it, is
right,
how it overlaps in that kind of way.
So when I got the information that they were looking, and I blind copied Nate in a couple of my emails, so he got to see them. Once I heard they were going to be okay, and then I found out that football wasn't going to happen, and you can understand football, right? and then I found out volleyball was considered high impact and also not going to happen. And so I had sent an email out prior to the volleyball one that said, hey, I get that you're struggling with football, but rather than just have kids practice, I think the state should come up with rules for some kind of flag football setup so kids could practice but get right into some kind of competition, because ultimately the kids just want to play the game. And if we don't have impact, I think most of them will still play the game. And it gives coaches the opportunity to still coach the same skills short of tackling skills, but the blocking skills are the same, the running skills are the same, the passing skills, the plays can be the same, so I think the receiver routes can be the same. I think you could play it as an 8-man sport on an 11-man field. It would be wide open and fun, and I think it would be pretty darn interesting. So I advocated for that. I haven't heard back from them. And my wife coaches girls volleyball here at Unadilla Valley, and my son coaches boys volleyball at Unadilla Valley. And I of course advocated, I haven't seen a volleyball game where volleyball players are running into each other over and over and over and over and over again. And not once have I seen a volleyball player tackle another volleyball player. Now I have seen a a mid-court collision once in a while, but those are so few and far between, that I can't understand it. And then somebody told me it was because it's an indoor sport, and I'm scratching my head on that one again, saying, okay, it's an indoor sport, but the governor said each athlete could only have 2 spectators. So the best numbers I've seen in girls volleyball, for example, have been maybe 10 to 12 kids on JV and 10 to 12 kids on varsity. That's the best numbers, and most of them aren't that good. So I'm thinking to myself, what's 80 to 100 fans in a gym meant to hold 1,700? I'm not seeing the issue. It's easy to social distance. We can make that happen. And if they don't wear their masks, we tell them to leave. I mean, that's what I get, me and the administrators, I guess that's what we get paid the big bucks for. So I think they're selling some things short there when they take a 6-person sport and say it's high impact and can't play it. I would get basketball, it's indoors, but still, even basketball, it's no more high impact than soccer. And if you're going to limit spectators, now you're talking no more than 80 spectators typically. I mean, most coaches don't like carrying more than 10 basketball players, because at the varsity level, 10 gets hard to play. So I sit back and I just think there's a lot of guidance out there that we can use, and we should be given the opportunity to try to come up with plans to pull it off.
We haven't really spoken too much about winter sports. We did have a guest a few weeks ago, just to kind of comment, because winter sports, everything fell apart after their season was over, and we just haven't, fall was up next, spring was up next. But I did contact the State Department of Health this week, and a response I got for the whole indoor situation was that, indoors they're recommending people stay 12 feet apart and wear masks, as compared to outdoors, where, like you said, soccer, they can run around and be near each other, and there's contact involved. Football practice is going to have contact involved. Right. But they're saying that because it's outside, I mean, the wind's blowing right here, that maybe it will. They said it was more of a high risk situation to be in a gym. So, right. I mean, I guess fall sports are first, but is that something that you think is can be followed? Is like, because I mean, we haven't really gotten to winter sports, like I said, but it seems like it's going to be another whole conversation about the whole 12 feet apart. Can you really even play them starting in November?
I think indoor sports in general can be a little higher risk, but the easy answer to that is kids still want to play. And kids have said over and over again in the surveys we've done at Unadilla Valley that they'll play even if they can't have spectators. They just want to play. So indoor sports, the no-brainer is play them with masks and no spectators. Call it good. Or one spectator per kid. It's easy to sit 12 feet apart in our smallest of gyms with one spectator per kid. And they alternate who they bring to what games.
And just to be clear, Unadilla Valley is a class what school? Class D?
Class C and D, depends on the sport. Yep.
Bob, I know I'm curious what you've heard this week or what your thoughts are. I know the three of us have obviously all dug into it, but I think everyone was maybe a little surprised when Governor Cuomo said, yeah, I'm giving green light to do some sports and activities. And everyone I talked to this week, it seems like the planning very difficult. And when you solve one problem, another pops up. I mean, if you had to put a number on it, 1 to 10, like, do you think fall sports can actually happen when you start thinking about busing and transportation and all those things that maybe the average fan hasn't thought about yet?
Well, I think that one of the things we should probably focus on is sports with low enough numbers that kids, you can just take one bus. I mean, that's something we probably should focus on. I question why the state doesn't even, for example, change the rules a bit to soccer so that you play it a little differently if you have to. But let's say that soccer is still a go. I think it's doable. I think I would prefer that kids wore masks. I only prefer that because there is, when you play soccer, you are shoulder to shoulder for yards on end, over and over again with multiple different people. So my feeling is by the silicone things that go inside your mask so that it's easier to breathe and you're not breathing the mask in, and wear your mask. And I again, our surveys show that kids would wear masks just to play. So I think it can be done. I think that every school should have portable hand washing stations on their game fields, on the sidelines of their game fields, for athletes to be able to wash their hands and practice proper hygiene. I think that now that buses can have hand sanitizer on them, I think that's important too. For regular runs, AM, PM, just to get kids here, much less sports runs. But I do think it's doable. I think that the first thing we have to focus on, obviously, is opening next week. September 8th, right around the corner. We open on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week for staff, and then start with students on September 8th. I think once we've got a week under our belt of what worked and what didn't work and what do we have to fix on regular opening, I think that we can sit down and see how the PE stuff is going, because our PE department's doing some traditional stuff as well as, the mindfulness kind of things. So I think that we can sit down with them and put together more explicit plans and protocols for safety. And I think we can be ready by the 21st or 22nd to start practice. I think it can be done safely. I just believe that I was a little surprised, honestly, that soccer was approved as a sport. I find the surprising part to that is it's really hard to control the amount of impact. I was more surprised that soccer, field hockey, games like that got approved and volleyball didn't, for example. I think we could pull it off. And if we had to say no spectators, we would say no spectators. As much as it would stink for the community, what we're really here for as a school is the kids. And I know that if kids participate in clubs and sports, they're more likely to do better in school and persevere even when school is academic components of school are a struggle, and actually graduate. And what's important, I understand health and safety is of the number one. It's the utmost importance. But we also have to keep our eyes on that prize. If you're a kid and the fact, or an administrator or teacher, you want all your kids to graduate, 100% of them. And one of the biggest levers we have with some of our most at-risk kids is sports and clubs. Sports and clubs.
Yeah, I was speaking to Tanner Russell, the athletic director at Town of Webb, Old Forge up north. And one of the things he spoke a lot about was the social learning that comes along with sports, and how countless athletic directors and superintendents and administrators have told me how much sports plays a role in getting, the students have told me themselves about how much sports motivate them to do well, to maintain that GPA, to be engaged in a time that seems right now even so disengaging because we're all just behind a screen at home, not going anywhere.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of my other fears with things, though, if we don't find a way to have football players get into some kind of competition, say fall sports really start, which is our goal, right, on the 21st of September, and football players have only practice to look forward to all fall. And they look up on the neighboring field and they see the soccer teams playing games once or twice a week. We've struggled in New York State. Numbers of participating athletes in all sports seems to be declining, but football is one of those sports that has seen a significant decline in the number of participants in recent years. And my fear, if we don't have some kind of competition, is it's going to, if kids really want to be active, at some point, those kids who are on the fence, the quick, fast kids who just want to participate, decide, I was a wide receiver, I was a quarterback, I was a running back, I'm going to go play football. I was the kicker, I was the punter, I'm going to go play soccer. And if that starts to happen, we could be looking at a significant change in the number of kids playing football. And I'm an optimist about a lot of things, but I'm a realist also. And I'm not positive that the fall of 21 is going to look a lot different than the fall of 20 when it comes to opening schools. I would like to say it is, but we are rural, and due to population density and things like that, I would question, and I think I've talked about this with Nate, I believe, I would question whether any mass-produced vaccine will be available at that level and successful enough to have more normalcy when we open, even in the fall of 21.
Is that what? Sorry, Nate. Do you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead.
I was just to follow up on that. Is that what you think high school athletics is hinging on? Is the vaccine? Obviously, that's an important part. Health experts have said in getting back to what we would consider to be normal. But on the high school athletic level, we also know from Rob Zayas and the section leaders that testing and things like that is just not monetarily, financially possible at the high school level. So it seems like no matter what, there's a certain level of risk. So is the vaccine what's really what high school athletics are hinging on to really feel confident in returning?
I think that there's a lot of hope out there for a vaccine to be effective. I don't know that, I was a social studies teacher, far from a science teacher. I don't know how successful a vaccine will be. Obviously, it's a virus, and what little we know about a virus is that vaccines are harder to come by to impact viruses in a positive way. So, but I also think the idea of a vaccine for something like this that seems to hit, when it hits the places with high population density, seem to fare much worse than places like rural New York have. You look at Oneonta, and Oneonta had very few cases until last week. Now they're over 100.
And that's when the college kids came back, of course, to Superintendent, which is like
Correct.
a huge part of the population of Oneonta.
Yeah, so I think we have to be careful. We have to be cautious. But one of the things that's good about schools is we can control the protocols better, I think, than we can't control what happens at home and what they do outside of school and outside of practice times or outside of game times, other than when they're in school. But we can control that element more, and they are with us a long period of time. And I think if you look at a college, the teacher to student ratio is totally different than, say, a public school. Much higher more students to every professor at college, obviously, than there are here. And I don't believe professors are as involved in the extracurriculars typically as our teachers can be. So I think we can put some protocols in place. We can keep things as safe as possible. Can guarantee a student, no public school in New York State or the United States is going to be able to guarantee a student or a staff member doesn't test positive for COVID-19. We can hope that we have the protocols in place to keep kids in front of teachers as long as possible, and that we stay healthy as long as possible, and we don't go 100% remote for at least a few months. I think that's important. Getting that face time is incredibly important. But I do
Bob,
think
I know
a lot hinges on that vaccine.
Bob, I know when you came on the podcast with me, we talked about this, just to change gears a little bit, but we talked a lot about that state aid and school budgets and the effect that all that has on this. And I know that's something that you've really dove into that very deeply. So can you just give us a little update on what you're seeing there? I'm hearing from a lot of schools that it's going to be very, very tough.
The Office of Budget, which is a division of the governor's office, so it's driven by the governor, has come out and said that we will see 20% reductions in aid. Some may become permanent throughout our state aid payments for the year. So a 20% reduction in aid impacts a school like Unadilla Valley tremendously, and most schools in our rural area are going to be affected. And I think even like Utica City schools is highly impoverished, so they're considered high need. So when you look at the school districts, you want to look at the high need districts and look at a 20% cut to their aid. So a 20% cut in our aid, if things flow the way they're supposed to, is going to be in the millions. And I'm not talking, it's higher than 3. What we're trying to advocate for is, while we understand the need for cuts, there needs to be a way to do this in a more equitable manner. 20% across the board for every school district in the state has a profound impact on the highest need school districts, or the school district with the highest poverty rates. And then there's the average need districts. It has the next highest impact on them and their ability to provide quality learning opportunities that would be equitable within the district when you have some of the kids virtual and some of the kids in person. And also, one of the things we have to argue for as superintendents and school board members and teachers all the time when it comes to state aid, and communities should too, is that state aid be distributed more equitably anyway, to provide equitable opportunity for rural kids when they compete for college seats against suburban and urban wealthy districts, and even some rural wealthy districts. There are very few genuine rural wealthy districts, and that's something I want to point out too. They may seem wealthy on the state's need category list, but they're wealthy only in property wealth. If you look at per capita or per household income, they're far from wealthy. They may have, you take a district like Franklin, it's loaded with second homeowners. Those folks don't necessarily live there, but they buy property there because they like it. It's proximity to New York City or downstate, and it's affordable to them. But the cost of property to the average citizen of Franklin is potentially something they can't afford to buy because of the cost per acre or for a typical home. And if you get in the watershed, it gets even worse. So I think there needs to be, we understand the need to potentially have some cuts of aid payments. However, there isn't a school district that's high need that can sustain a year of that loss and come back in 21-22 and withstand some of that or a lot of that becoming permanent. It could devastate rural communities.
I had heard from some of my colleagues this week as they're doing reporting on the school budgets and following that tab, that some of them have been coming in with some cuts. They hadn't been, and we had heard a lot about the 20% possibility. And as of this week, one of my colleagues said to me, hey, be on the lookout. Schools are now seeing some reductions in the amount of aid they're receiving in their checks. And my first thought is athletics. Is that something that goes? I remember being in school and, the extracurricular activities were what kind of was put to the side in order to make up for that. Can that start affecting schools for this season, for maybe their football teams this season, for maybe any kind of athletics this year? Or is that something that would, hey, this year's set already for whatever we're doing, and it would just start to see next year?
Well, I can only speak for our school district, right? So every school district is going to handle these cuts differently. We knew about these cuts potentially coming before we took our budgets to our school boards and had them adopted. And because a budget is unique to a local community, and every superintendent probably has a different concept of how to try to navigate cuts of this nature, you'll see everybody responding to the cuts a little differently. Some will consider sports and extracurriculars. They do equate to, when you combine the two of them in total costs, somewhere in the neighborhood of between, so sports are about 300,000 and change. Clubs are about probably close to 300,000. So by the time you're done, it's going to be somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000 of a $22 million budget. Could they go by the wayside? I guess in some instances, people might look at that as the low-hanging fruit. Let's take that first. I think this year, some of the larger districts are looking at, well, if we go all virtual in the middle and high school, it eliminates an entire second bus run. And they may have had more staff than they needed based on contractual class numbers they can assign, stuff like that. So they may be able to downsize some of their staffing a bit by going virtual. You're going to see a multitude of different things that schools are going to do to try to navigate this. Our end, we've tried not to hire this year, and Nate and I have had this discussion too, that having lived through 2009 to 2013 as a superintendent, and having the unfortunate task of trying to navigate what was, at that point in my career, felt like I would never see anything like it again, and this could be potentially worse to navigate financially. It's that large. So we had to downsize by about, when we were done, it was 38 people in 1 year, mostly attrition, but some layoffs, and then about 10 positions the following year. And I've said all along, as we developed this budget and we've worked with our unions, I do not want to have those meetings again with staff and union leaders to tell somebody I don't have a job for them. So we have chosen to kind of, as an organization, we're all trying to work together to do more with fewer people, similarly to what we had to do in that 9 to 13 time frame. Those were some tough years. The amount of potential aid cut this year is probably could probably be twice as high in 1 year as our worst year in 2009 to 2013.
Bob, do you think a lot of schools may try to save this year as much as possible and kind of push that ball down the road, and then, you know, next year, 21, 22, we'll start to see sports become an issue again of, well, we front loaded all this to try to save it and weather the storm. And then, later on down the road, if this continues on, it'll be harder on, like you said, every school is going to handle it differently, but I keep hearing a lot about that too.
I do think that, if you were to draw that radius between the viewership of your stations, David, and Nate, your radio listening typical areas, the overwhelming majority of schools in that large radius would probably be high need school districts. They were probably already, many of them already struggling a bit financially. Not all of them, but many. I wouldn't even say it's the majority yet. There are some that we know that have struggled immensely, and they are trying to, in a good year, they're struggling. And here we are now looking at a really different year. So I think that as we navigate this, if the cuts do become flat, stay flat across the board at any level, it is going to have a much deeper, more profoundly long-lasting impact on our school districts in the region we're talking about here, because most of them are high need.
And they're high need because everything you described earlier, but also because they're smaller districts, so they're not bringing in maybe as much. I know obviously a lot of the budgets for schools is brought in by property tax, if I'm not mistaken. So the less people there are, obviously the less money would be brought in, and that's the primary cost.
It's more to do with your it's a convoluted formula in state ed that comes out with this thing called combined wealth ratio. And the average combined wealth ratio of 700 districts in the state of New York is 1.0. And most of the districts probably within the radius we're talking about today are probably districts that are well below the 1.0 mark. For example, Unadilla Valley is 0.4. And you'll find that that's probably the case when you look at it in other districts. And probably the easiest thing for you guys to look at that would define the high need would be free and reduced lunch count. We run about 65 on average % of our kids eligible for free and reduced lunch. When I came here, we were about 48%. So our highest year has been 68% eligible for free and reduced lunch. That was just a couple years ago. The higher that rate, it's a sign of income wealth within the district or average household income. So that percentage gets higher as the middle class shrinks and poverty increases.
So I'm thinking about all of this, and obviously it is the financial side of this, which I appreciate you shedding light on, because of all the different aspects, that one we might not have touched on as much. And I don't know if it's really thought about as much when we're talking about playing the games of soccer, and coaches and transportation even starts to be on the fringe, or the testing and, you know, the social distancing rules and the social learning that comes with that. But the financing of the sports is kind of important, especially when you don't have, if you're not going to have spectators maybe paying for a $5 football ticket or something. I mean, today's August 30th, and the sports are set to start, as it stands now, on September 21st. Still a lot to figure out in between now and then. But from your mind, in your position, what is some of the big bullet points that need to be figured out soon here in order to really be able to start, like you said, you think you'll be able to?
So I think that we need to have some answers on what are one of the things that I would like to see from the Department of Health are minimum expectations for indoor sports, as far as health and safety protocols, PPE, that type of thing that we would need to follow, as well as outdoor. We have been given that brief guidance. If you go through, I think it's about a paragraph long, possibly a little longer, in the New York State Department of Health guidance for reopening schools. I really would like to see an organization like that put a little more thought into what we should do to restart sports, and give us some very specific guidelines to follow league to league, so there is similarity from one league to the next. It also helps us understand what we would have to expend as school districts in order to make sports work, or as leagues even. And there may be some difficult decisions around finances then, if we know what we have to do as minimum requirements. Like, do we have to have hand washing stations at every bench, in essence? What do we have to have for hand sanitizers? How many game balls do we have to have? Do we have to have extra officials to be able to see if there's a need to stop the game? What do we need to do minimally? You know, what's the floor? And if schools want to go higher, they can go higher. But what's the floor? I've asked for that, even for reopening guidance. I felt they should have given us a much more specific floor minimum expectation that all schools have to follow in order to reopen. I think they need to do that for sports. And they should include extracurriculars. It shouldn't be just sports. It should be about clubs. It should be about everything that we know are those high interest things for kids and communities.
Bob, I guess my last question is, if we get students in the door here soon, I know you're an administrator that likes to walk around and be with the kids and interact with the kids a ton. I mean, I've seen you do it for a long time now. Just how excited are you to get them back in the building, no matter what that looks like? It's got to feel good to maybe have a chance to be semi-normal again here soon.
It's going to be good to have. You know, we had 4 nights of orientation last week, and we had kids and parents in the building Monday through Thursday, probably over 100 throughout the half-hour segments, probably over 100 a night on average. So it was nice to see kids again. It was nice to see parents again. It was nice to see that many staff in the building, the hall's alive again. You know, the building isn't the same in the summer when nobody's here. And my favorite part about fall is when the halls come back to life. I love that the fields come back to life too, you know that, but you know, we spend so much time in our careers as educators in hallways, classrooms, lunchrooms, you know, with kids and families that it's what you look forward to, you know. And yeah, I am excited about it. I've got my elbow ready. I've got my foot ready to, you know, low five and elbow shake. And I've got a couple masks. I want to get some cooler masks, things like that. But yeah, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing kids, trying to figure out if I can spell some teachers in their classrooms for lunch once in a while and have lunch with groups of kids again, because I always eat lunch in the cafeteria with kids, and I usually eat breakfast in the hall with the kids. So those days are going to be a little different, a little odd.
Well, David, do you have anything else as we want to, or do we want to wrap up?
Yeah, I think you've given really great perspective, like I said a moment ago, on just the sustainability of high school sports and where it is in a situation where things don't appear to be stable in any regard. So getting back to that normalcy, and hopefully it is safer. And I've heard the perspective of, you know, let's bring back soccer, let's bring back the field hockey and see what happens before we bring back football and everything else in full gear. Because if that is successful, then maybe you can keep going rather than having everything maybe have a problem at once. So I'm definitely hoping that that's the case, and that you get to oversee a successful and safe and healthy return to the sports and to the physical health and physical education and all of that. So, I mean, unless there's anything else that's on your mind specifically that is so important as we are just a few days and we're starting September here for real.
The most important thing right now is doing everything we can to teach people how to live safely at this point in time in our lives, and get them to practice it. So if we can practice it in school and make it something these kids do on the fields or in the community, then and we get them to graduate, that's probably the most important thing. We'll figure out the money one way or another, and it won't be pretty, but we'll figure things out as best we can. And as superintendents and school boards and teachers and support staff, our goal will be to make sure that part has the, as best we can, the least impact on kids as possible.